Good morning. You're listening to WPVM LP in Asheville, North Carolina, 103.7 on your dial, but right now you're watching a special Facebook Live edition of the Blaine's World Show that you can watch on WPVM's Facebook page. I'm your host, Blaine Greenfield, and I'm here in my lovely Zoom studio in Fairview, North Carolina, and we're talking about an exciting event that's going to be coming to the Asheville theater scene in just a little bit, and that's Anne of Green Gables. And we're talking with the director, who is Kristen Hedberg, and we're also talking with Suzanne. Last name is
Tinsley.
Tinsley, that's what I thought. And welcome aboard, guys. You can wave to all your fans and friends in Facebook world. So if you're watching, you're seeing Suzanne and Kristen. And this is going to be a real exciting show that's coming up. And when is the opening date for it, Kristen?
February 18th.
Okay, and it's going to run for how long?
2 weekends, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
Okay, and that's going to be at HART. It's going to be the main theater or the other theater?
In the Fangmeyer.
Okay, super. And so let's talk a little bit about the show. But before we do, what I always like to do the first time, as Suzanne's hiding from us a little bit, is...
I am, and so I got in on my phone.
Okay, great, even better. But anyway, what I like to do first of all, when I have a guest for the first time, is to find out a little bit about them. And so, Kristen, I've had the pleasure of seeing you in a bunch of plays. And I think the very first one I just loved you in was, or was it Carousel at Diana Wortham?
Yes.
I mean, I'm sure you were in other things, but I think that's the first thing I recall seeing you in. And the question is, how did you get into, first of all, acting? Yeah.
Okay. Well, I grew up in a family of charismatic musical people. And my mom, who had her career for 38 years as a high school teacher, her full tenure was in English, but for many years, she was the director of the theater programs at the high schools. So when I was a little kid, I'd get off the bus at the high school, not go home. And I would sit and watch her direct for long periods of time. And when I was old enough, of course, in school to be doing plays, I, of course, was already immersed in that world and wanted to be a part of it. My mom had me taking piano lessons from the first grade and dance lessons from the third grade. So I was just immersed in it from day one. And also being a child of the outdoors, always living in my imagination and playing and having fun and inventing worlds and stories. And so it just was a natural progression, I think. And it was when I was in high school that I went to Governor's School West for drama one summer. And I had my first taste of what the professional level of exploring art might be. It was so intense, I felt turned upside down and crazy. But by the end of that 6 weeks, I was quite changed. And I look back to that one memory, and I think that that's what kind of set the course for me wanting to become a professional. And then my training from there starts in musical theater at Catawba College, and then time in the real world for some years, and then going back to school at the UNC School of the Arts, where I ended up doing my master's in opera performance. So from there, I ended up with the opera company in Asheville for some years, where I was producing, directing, performing, developing internships and educational programs, writing grants, just learning how to do it all, sometimes just by trying because there's no one else to do it. But that's what got me to where I am. And as a vocal person and a vocal teacher, sort of my aesthetic or my philosophy is very much blended between the classical world and the theater world.
If I can ask you, let me jump in, Kristen, if I can ask you a question. Do you remember the very first role you ever did? Doesn't have to be professional. It could be as a kid. Do you remember the very first time you were on stage?
I do. I think it was third grade, maybe second. And we did this play. I don't know if it was Peter Rabbit, but it had rabbits in it. And I remember playing this bunny named McGregor. I think I had 3 lines. But my first professional role, I was 13 and I played a Munchkin in The Wizard of Oz.
Well, here's an idea for you, and I'll ask Suzanne the same question too. But I want to do a fundraiser. I mentioned to Candace and Steve, some of the people at HART, where everybody, Suzanne, would do their very first role. You know, it wouldn't have to be the whole thing. It'd be a 5-minute thing on it. But your first role as a Munchkin, do they have a videotape of that somewhere?
That's pre those days.
But wouldn't
No.
that be a phenomenal idea that everybody would perform their first role so that it could live forever? So we'll get you as a Munchkin, tape you on that as a fundraiser. Suzanne, same question. Do you remember how you got into theater?
Well, my father was a ham and maybe a frustrated one, and I was always a ham too. And I have no background that even begins to compare with Kristen's. In my neighborhood, we would put on plays, and the kids would come and the parents would come. And in middle school, junior high school, it was at that time, we had a Mrs. Felmet who was very interested in theater, and she did a play that year, and I auditioned for it and got cast. That was 8th grade. And then the next thing was really my senior play in high school. And I went to UNC Greensboro and majored in speech and theater education. And I auditioned for everything. I never got cast ever until my senior year. And I think it was a pity casting. And I had 3 lines. And, but then when I came home, I graduated in 1977, and I came home and the Arts Council had decided to start a community theater group in Waynesville. And so I got involved with that. And the first production was Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. And I played the brunette, but not the Jane one, not that one. Anyway, and so I have been involved in Haywood County Theater for these many years. So 45 years? Excuse me one second. 45 years. And I was on the founding board of HART, and have directed and acted. And our church was very active in theater things too. Excuse me again, I'm sorry. And we did Fiddler on the Roof and The Sound of Music, and we did selections from Cats, and we did selections from Les Mis, and all this stuff at our church. So all of my experience is very local, but I think the love is as strong as
Well, let's keep it in mind, because we'll ask you the same question, when the part of it does this fundraiser, to think back to the first production. But then I think I saw something about you recently. I saw you in a play and I enjoyed it, the most recent play you were in. But I thought I read in the playbill that you had stepped aside for a bunch of years and hadn't acted, and then came back into acting. Was that, what was the play I just saw you in? It was a lot of fun.
The Last Romance.
The Last Romance. But that was the first play you had done for quite a while, right?
In about 5 years. Before that, it was All My Sons. We did All My Sons back a few years ago, and have done some studio things and some main stage things.
Now, let me ask the both of you too, because one of the things I find interesting about the both of you is that, and somewhat disappointing in Kristen's case, is that she's doing the directing, because I love seeing you on stage, so now I'll just see you behind it as a director. But what got you into directing, Kristen?
Well, I think the earliest source goes back to the memory I shared earlier about my mother, just watching her as a child. It seemed this very natural thing. And then later in high school, actually being directed by her. And then it really became just sort of a natural part of my own progression as a performer, working with not only directors, but conductors, which is a form of director for sure. And wading my way through the waters of different directing styles and different conductor styles as a performer, and watching and having those moments where you work with a director who gives you very little or nothing, or is in your face to the point that you feel like a chicken plucked. And all the while trying to sort out how to motivate what they're asking you to do, and figuring out what is my style, what is my method of communication that works if I'm going to take that seat. Having been in the actor's shoes, having been in the singer's shoes. And so it was a natural progression. Sometimes along the way, it would be like, can you direct this scene? Can you direct this cabaret, this fundraiser? And then building that to, oh, let's give her a show. And then let's give her, a 1 act. And now let's give her a 2 act. Now let's give her a musical. Let's give her an opera. And it just became very hand in hand. I music direct. It's not my passion, actually, because I find it less creative. Where I love to be in music in the theater is from a place of composition, because I get to create that music.
Do you prefer acting or directing?
I think my first, go-to is obviously performing, because that's the thing I've done the most. That's the thing that's been ingrained in me for the longest. But I would not say that I feel less about directing. It's just not been the focus always.
And I know you.
And it started to be more so about 10 years ago, but then I started being full-time at the university. And what that did is limit me in a lot of the things that I liked to do, because I had to hyper focus on being a vocal teacher, which I love. And I got to work with a lot of amazing people there. But the amount of time it required of me mentally and physically meant that I was very limited in the diverse projects that I'm interested in myself. And I started to notice over some years that I was that person that was the voice teacher, sometimes the music director, who could maybe do a show in the summer. And so that's when I decided, Suzanne felt like she took a little break from some things. That felt sort of like a break for me in a different way. And it was like, it's time to go. It's time to rebalance and say these things need to come back.
Well, imagine Suzanne's case, and we'll talk about that too, because I know you've done directing as well. I guess the tough thing, Suzanne, for you when you direct is you don't have the opportunity to memorize dialogue. And I know that must be like one of the favorite things about, when you're directing, you're giving up that opportunity to memorize dialogue. But what do you prefer, directing or acting?
I prefer directing.
Yeah.
But I'm not, I have loved working with Kristen, and I'm not just kissing up here. She came in day one so organized and so ready, and answers to so many questions already. And her vision for the play is so clear in her head and she communicates it well. So that makes it easy. I haven't, when I direct, there are lots of things that many directors concentrate on different things. Some directors concentrate on spectacle, and some directors concentrate on transitions and everything. What I love about directing is helping people find a character. And to work with somebody, especially in community theater, people, it's their first time on stage.
Sure.
And they want it to be a fun time, and they don't want to mess up, and they're worried about their lines and all that. But there's so many ways to comment a character, and it's nice to help people find their best way for their experience level and for what the part is asking of them.
And let's use that statement, Suzanne, to talk a little bit about then the play you're going to be in, and I'll ask Kristen to maybe give an overview on it. But it's one I'm looking forward to, and it's going to be Anne of Green Gables. And I guess, Kristen, the first question is, how do you come up with the idea of doing that play? And then we'll talk a little bit about it. Was it your choice?
Yes. I am a huge Anne of Green Gables fan, first of all. So that's a story that's very important to me. And Sheila Sumter, who's the director of Kids at HART, had approached me back in the summer about directing a show for Kids at HART. And so my question was, does it have to be a certain age range? Does it have to be a certain size? And she said, no, it can be anything you want as long as it's a play. And so I brought the idea forward and they were very excited about it. So, we have a cast of 11 and 8 of them are youth, teenagers. And then we have 3 mature adults in the mature adult role. So it's a Kids at Heart production, but in a way it's collaborative with the main stage in that all of the roles are cast in the way they would be done in the world. They're age appropriate.
Well, what's interesting, you said that, and I give you a lot of credit for not typecasting Suzanne. So she's going to be a teenager in this? Is that it? No, it's very unusual that you can pull that off. Thank you for doing that. But
Thank you.
But talk about, it's your acting ability, Suzanne. But talk about the show then, Kristen. The people who see Anne of Green Gables, and you were telling me off there, I thought it was kind of interesting, are not going to necessarily see the recent TV series. Is that correct?
That's very correct. Yeah. So, Anne with an E, which is wonderful in that it has reintroduced this story to new audiences, is in its basic structure kind of the same story. You've got the same character. Right. But the mood of it is very different. It takes lots of liberties and creates subplots and side stories, changes outcomes of characters. And it has that quintessential 2022 need to be dark and cerebral about it that we see in so many things today. And the novel by Lucy Maud Montgomery is nothing like that. And if you're a huge Anne fan, you will know the movies from the 80s that starred Megan Follows and Colleen Dewhurst. And those movies, although they're not identical to the book, are very similar. And they capture the spirit and the mood and the imaginative world of Anne, which is quite humorous while tragic at the same time and extremely honest, but not pulled back, not withdrawn. And so this play adaptation, which is by Peter Delaurier, is very close to the book. It's so close. You can tell that he wanted to adapt the book and put it on the stage. And that was one of the things that drew me to this particular adaptation.
If I can ask you, Kristen, for the benefit of people who, believe it or not, don't know the book, don't know the movie, can you give like a real quick Reader's Digest version of what they're going to see?
Sure. I'll start with saying, welcome to Canada. Just off of Nova Scotia is an island called Prince Edward Island, and that is where we set the scene. We're in the 1890s, just at the beginning of what might look like the Industrial Revolution. So we're outside of that time. We're in a world still of carriages and dirt roads and single-room schoolhouses. Anne is a girl of about 12 years old when we meet her, who has been an orphan since she was a baby. And she has been moved from orphanage to orphanage, or they call it an asylum back then. She's lived with families who have large amounts of children and basically been a servant and helped raise the children and care for them. And she's never, ever received any love of any kind in her life. And at the top of the show, she is under the impression that she's being brought to Prince Edward Island by a brother and a sister named Marilla and Matthew Cuthbert, who need a young person to help them with their farm. So she believes she's going there to stay and to be theirs. And we start out with a mix-up because the Cuthberts had asked for a boy to help on the farm. And so when she arrives and she finds out the mistake, it's quite traumatic for her to have come all this way and be rejected again. What we have is a story that unfolds in which Anne, who is the most open-minded, hilarious, temperamental, and forgiving person I think I've ever seen written down. We see her change the people around her, and we see the people around her allow her to trust. And ultimately, we see her grow up. We see her, how smart she is, that she goes off to college. She eventually, post this show, becomes a published writer. And we see that it's possible for anyone to find home.
Now, in terms of preparing for the role, Suzanne, had you read the book or seen the movies?
I had seen the movies years and years ago,
Right.
not Anne with an E. I saw the 1980s Anne of Green Gables and Anne of Avonlea. My parents loved them. And but I did not read the book as a child or even, and I have thought now I should go back and pick it up, but I have not yet read it.
Or I always wonder too, when I speak to actors, if you have a desire now, or maybe after the fact, to see the movie, it'll probably be kind of interesting, you know.
Well, a little. I don't like to watch somebody else do it, because I would like to think that I'm not taking something from somebody else, that I'm coming up with all this brilliantness by myself or with the help of my director. But I love Colleen Dewhurst, who played Marilla in the 80s series. She's a little intimidating for me, but I don't generally like to watch it until after things are said and done.
And then you'll read the book after that, you know.
Yeah, probably.
And who's your husband in the show?
I'm not married.
Excuse me, your brother. I'm sorry. Who's your brother?
Stephen Gagne,
Oh, okay.
who was my brother in Last Romance. And this is the third time Stephen and I have been brother and sister on stage.
Okay, but you were perfect. And I love that show, you know, the Last Romance, which is so lovely. And then also talk about your other adult character in the show is Lynn, right? Lynn's going to be in it?
Lynn Donnelly.
Okay, and
And she plays my best friend, Rachel.
Okay.
My very opinionated best friend.
I was going to say, indeed, very opinionated. And I'll ask you, Kristen, one other, I guess, tough thing about putting on the show, and I'll ask you to talk about, you said you're going to work with a lot of the younger actors. How is that in terms, especially, I don't know who Anne will be in the show, but how was that to find the right, was that difficult to find the right Anne?
Absolutely not. First of all, Abby Welkle is playing Anne, and she's worth a ticket. She has a natural sense of herself and a depth in her communication that I think is beyond her years. And I absolutely adore working with her. She takes direction like a sponge, yet she makes it her own. She's confident in the room. She listens. She often corrects us when we're wrong. So she's quite the Anne in that respect. I think it goes back years now since I came to Western North Carolina, and I've directed children and teenagers before now, having worked on Brundibar at the opera, which was an entire youth cast, and then Sound of Music, of course, you got the Von Trapp children. And I will say I have never been disappointed by the immaculate level of talent that comes in auditions between 10 and 18. We are full of that in this area. And that's always been my experience. And I've always worked very easily with youth. I just treat them like everybody else, and they seem to respond well to that. Sheila Sumter, you got to give her credit for Kids at Heart. She started this, 4 years ago, maybe now, I can't remember exactly, maybe 5. And she's trained these kids through her classes and through her productions. And so it's been pretty easy for me. These kids have already walked in and they know, please be quiet, sign your name that you're here, write down your blocking, listen. And they're so eager, they're so positive, and they support each other so well. It's wonderful to be a part of that, because sometimes that's not the part of the theater. You have a lot of unsupporting environments, unfortunately, but these kids are being trained beautifully. And so that's a credit to Sheila. And it's just a perk for me to get to walk into it and build upon it and make it an educational environment for them, hopefully in a professional experience.
And as you're talking about it, it has me excited to another upcoming show at HART after Anne of Green Gables. And that's going to be Newsies, and it's very exciting that that's going to also be another joint production of Kids at HART and regular performers. And I'm really looking forward to that coming up a little bit later in the season. To wrap up, if folks want to see Anne of Green Gables, the show runs again when?
February 18, 19, 20, and 25, 26, 27.
With a Sunday matinee on both those, right?
So 7:30 evenings on Friday, Saturday, and 2 o'clock in the afternoon on Sunday.
Great. And if they want to get tickets, best bet is to do what?
You're going to call the HART box office. Because it's their winter hours, they're not necessarily open every day. You'll hear in the recording very clearly that you can simply leave a message with how many tickets you would like and what day, and they will write that down, record it for you. And unless there's an issue like it's sold out, you can be guaranteed that those tickets are for you. When you arrive, you can pay. And then when you enter the theater, rather than having an assigned seat like you do in the main season, it's general seating. So first come, first serve. Okay,
and just it's a lovely little theater, and I'm certainly looking forward to it. I'll get to see Suzanne as Marilla, a very exciting part. And I look forward to seeing you both on upcoming, and I'll see you that first Sunday. So thanks again for being my guest on this special edition of the Blaine's World Show. I'd also thank my producer, Amy Prisnash, and we'll see you at the regular time on Wednesdays at 9 a.m. here on WPVM 103.7, also on Facebook. Thanks, guys. Speak to you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Suzanne. See ya. Okay, and we'll sign off here.